Hello again, and thank you so much for joining me for this next class on the Gospel of John. To this point, we have studied the miracles of Jesus, the I am statements of Jesus, the discourse of Jesus in the upper room, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, and now we are going to discuss the event that we find in chapter 21, where Jesus reveals himself again to the disciples after his resurrection. If you were listening to me just now, you heard the name Jesus mentioned a lot. That is because this gospel and the study around it has focused primarily on the life of Jesus and getting to know him better so that we can increase our faith. What is our theme verse for this study? Chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. Let's read those again. Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. We want to get to know Jesus better. Today, I would like to spend the entirety of our study on an event that we find in the last chapter of this book, number 21. I have called this class Breakfast on the Beach. As with the previous classes, I'm going to assume that you have already read the entire chapter prior to this class. However, since I'm feeling a little generous today, I'm going to give you a break if you haven't, and we're going to read the entire chapter together here now. It's 25 verses, but I think it will be good for us to have it fresh in our minds as we discuss our thoughts today. So let's begin reading in chapter 21, verse number 1 together. Please follow along with me. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. They said to him, We will go with you. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, Children, do you have any fish? They answered him, No. He said to them, Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in, because of the great quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, It is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from land, but about 100 yards off. When Jesus got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, with fish laid out on it, and bread. Jesus said to them, Bring some of the fish that you have caught. Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, Come and have breakfast. Now none of the disciples dared ask him, Who are you? For they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished breakfast, verse 15, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, Feed my lambs. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, Tend my sheep. He said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, Do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, Feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, Follow me. Verse number 20, Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them, The one who had been reclining at table close to him and had said, "Lord, who is this that is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, "Lord, what about this man?" Jesus said to him, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me." So the saying spread abroad among the brothers that this disciple was not to die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he was not to die, but, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you?" This is a disciple who is bearing witness about these things, and who has written these things, and we know that his testimony is true. Now there are also many other things that Jesus did. Were every one of them to be written, I suppose the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. All right, so having read this final chapter, let's simply go through it in the order that is presented, and along the way, let's see if we can try to find some application for us today. So, with the week-long festival of the unleavened bread now past, the disciples leave Jerusalem and head back to Galilee. The first verse there mentions the Sea of Tiberias, or the Sea of Galilee. If you recall, this is where we first heard about this sea back in chapter 6, around where Jesus fed the 5,000. Jesus recalls specifically that there were 7 apostles together here in one place, including him. Peter appears to become restless after all the things that have gone on, so he decides he's going to go fishing. And the others decide they're going to join him. And let's pause here for a moment and think about the disciples. Jesus had died. Yes, they had seen him, but they really did not know what they should be doing here. And so Peter does what Peter knows, and that is fishing. But in this instance, they catch nothing. I'll admit I'm not much of a fisherman, but I would be pretty upset if I went fishing and didn't catch any fish, no matter what. I went to a trout farm one time when I was younger, and I think I caught a cooler full of trout before my parents could even unpack the suitcases. And, I figured it was easy. Later when I find out that it's not, however, this is what Peter did for a living before Jesus called him, if you recall. And so for him to get shut out, so to speak, on this night, probably was just adding insult to injury. Peter may have been thinking, okay, I just denied Peter 3 times, and I watched him die a cruel death on the cross, and now I'm not even good at my trade anymore. That old life probably brought on some susceptibility for temptation of despair. But our loving Savior here, Jesus, he knows when we're hurting, and he's always with us, and I think that's a comforting thought. And so, in the midst of this trial for Peter and the others as well, Jesus has a lesson for them and for us. In verse 4, we find Jesus already standing on the shore, starting to prepare breakfast on the beach. He rhetorically shouts out to them and asks if they've caught any fish, knowing full well that he is about to perform a miracle in front of their eyes. As they answer no, Jesus instructs them to cast their nets on the right side of the boat, and I can just see Peter kind of, "Now look, stranger, I'm kind of an expert on this. We've been out here all night fishing. The side of the boat that we cast on has not been the problem, okay?" But, interestingly enough, John does not record any hesitation on their part. Whether there was or not, we don't know. He doesn't record any hesitation on their part to listen to Jesus and cast their nets on the other side. And when they do, they can't even haul the catch of fish in because it is so large. And here I find this interesting. John, the writer of this book, commonly referred to here and other places as the disciple whom Jesus loved. He even refers to himself that way as he writes this in the third person. To me, it seems that he makes this declaration here, "It is the Lord!" exclamation mark. Now, in this dim breaking of daylight, how would John possibly know this? To me, it seems that he clearly understands what just happened as a miracle, and that only Jesus could perform. They had caught nothing, and now they can't even bring in what they have caught. And maybe John recognizes his voice, and John probably no doubt also remembers what happened earlier when Jesus fed the fish and used the fish to make it last to feed nearly 20,000 people, we assume, more than 5,000. But that, and hearing his voice, convinced John that it was Jesus who was speaking and who was interacting with them. So our beloved impetuous Peter here, he decides he's not going to wait for them to get all the fish in and bring the boat to shore. He just grabs his cloak and he jumps in the water. What is the significance of him putting on his outer garment? Just to pause here to explain that, it would seem that Peter also now believes it is Jesus, and he most likely was not completely clothed while they're fishing. And, he knows that it's a customary greeting as a Jew to greet people as more of a religious act that one followed and showed proper respect. So it would appear that, he knew he was going to meet Jesus, therefore he wanted to show the proper respect, although he's going to be soaking wet when he gets there because he jumps in the water and swims to shore. The others follow behind in the boat. Thanks for the help, Peter, they're probably thinking, and they bring all these fish in. They had been about a football field away or so from land, and so, as we mentioned, Jesus has already started breakfast with his own fish that he's caught. He has a charcoal fire there going, and some fish are heating up. And there was also some bread that was available. Jesus asked them to bring the fish that they've caught, in verse number 10. So they bring all the fish, 153 of them. Yes, apparently they counted. It's probably common for them to do that back in those days, to count their fish before they took them to market. But this isn't some exaggerated story. We caught 150 fish. And sure, Peter. No, they actually counted them. And there doesn't really appear to be any significance to this number or symbolism with this number. Simply just appears to be the count. But again, they would routinely count these for the next day's sale. But Jesus knew that they would be hungry. So he feeds and serves them. This always takes me back to when Jesus washed the disciples' feet in that act of service and how important that was. And so at this point, everyone knows who it is. John mentions this is now the third time that Jesus has appeared to them as a group. There were other, of course, times where there were individual appearances of Jesus to people, but to the group, this is the third time now that John recalls. And now we see Jesus go into teaching mode again. He starts off with a conversation with Peter. It's possible that they broke up into groups here to eat. We're not really told that, but regardless, Peter is either close to Jesus or next to Jesus, and Jesus leads Peter through an exercise here that is designed to remove the cloud of doubt from Peter's earlier 3 denials. And Peter had denied Jesus 3 times, and so Jesus was going to give him 3 opportunities to show his love for Jesus. So 3 times Jesus will ask Peter if he loves him, and 3 times Peter will affirm this. There is some room here for a word study on the word love. Peter appears to respond all 3 times with the same Greek word for love, while Jesus uses a different Greek verb for the final of the 3 questions. Most commentators concur that although these words are slightly different, there's most likely no difference in the intended meaning, as these words are often used interchangeably anyway. But each time Jesus asks Peter if he loves him more than these. There is also some discussion to be had here about who are these. It would not seem likely that Jesus is asking Peter if he loves them more than the 153 fish that they caught, but rather if he loves him more than the other disciples do, or more likely, do you love me more than you love these other men? All are basically along the same thread of, do you love me more than physical things? And I think that's a very important question for us as well today. But accompanying each affirmation from Peter, Jesus then tells him to feed my sheep, feed my lambs, feed my sheep. Peter's assertions of love needed to be accompanied by actions that showed that love. And Peter is somewhat hurt here by Jesus' continual asking of the same question, although I think he eventually will understand if you follow along here. Peter had to face his true feelings and his motives when Jesus confronted him. That leads me to a little application again for us today. How would you respond if Jesus asked you, do you love me? Ask yourself, do you really love Jesus? Are you even his friend? And as we mentioned above, Peter is instructed to feed sheep and lambs, much like Jesus did as the Good Shepherd back in chapter 10. Peter will now demonstrate his love for Jesus by loving God's people and feeding them with the Word of God. What more is Peter really being asked to do here? Let's think about that. He's given an imperative command to serve with tender care and compassion. He is basically given the charge to care for God's people. And as the church, we are told to do that as well. Peter, would later become an elder and so do many acts of service and work for the furthering of God's kingdom. What are you doing to further God's kingdom? Again, ask yourself how you would respond if Jesus told you, hey, you have work to do. You know what you have to do, so go out and do it. That is our charge. That is the Great Commission that we find in other verses of the Bible. Would that be enough of a challenge to make you make the right choices in life? I pray that it would. Jesus then essentially predicts Peter's method of death starting in verse number 18. He tells Peter to stretch out his hands in the manner of a crucifixion. And evidence shortly after the New Testament would seem to indicate that this is how Peter died as a martyr. Some say he was crucified upside down because he did not want to die in the same manner as Jesus. I can understand him feeling that way clearly. However, I do caution that some of these accounts are overlaid with legendary material that may be considered somewhat unreliable. So take that for what it's worth. I do not have any evidence either way, so I'm not going to comment on it further about what I think or what it should be. And I would imagine that Peter surely does not want to go through this said crucifixion, but he would seem to be resigned to that fact. If you flipped over to 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 12 through 14, you can write that down and go later. That's where he reminds the readers there that his time is drawing near and that Jesus made that clear to him. And he's obviously referring to this incident here. But after Jesus tells Peter about how he will die, Peter asked Jesus to tell him about how John would die, the writer of this book, the disciple whom Jesus loved. Jesus tells Peter, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. Just follow me. That's all you need to know. Because of Jesus' response about John, some people then would go on to believe that John was not to die. But we know that, of course, not to be the case, as he died in exile in Patmos as an old man at the end of the first century, writing 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John and Revelation as well. Then John rather hastily wraps up his entire account as well as the entire book here by affirming that he is the disciple that Jesus was talking about when he was in this instance with Peter, and that he is witness to all of the things that we have just read, not just in this account, but all of the things prior to it. And that we, again, third person referring to himself in that way, know them to be true. John constantly referred to himself in this way as the disciple whom Jesus loved, so as hopefully lend credence to the validity of all the things that he is saying and recounting. What about you? When you speak and recount something, can people know that you're telling the truth? Or have you in the past perhaps shattered the trust of people with your words and language? Have you given people a reason for them to doubt that what you say might actually be the truth? That trust can be very hard to get back. It's easy to lose, but very hard to earn back. But it is a worthy task for us to work for that. And so, as our theme verses in the previous chapter, 30 and 31, tell us, we see John close his book by recalling that Jesus did so many things to prove who he said he was. He even gives a little hyperbole here by saying, that the world could not contain all the books that would be written if they were to recount every single thing that Jesus did. I'm not much of a reader, and there are a lot of books behind me right now, but that's a lot of books. And regardless of the hyperbole, it was a lot. And we can see that from everything that we have studied so far in this class, that is clearly the case. There are so many instances where we can see Jesus revealing who he is. Are we going to reject the evidence as false and choose not to follow Jesus fully? Or are we going to accept this firsthand knowledge that we read about and use it to increase our faith in who Jesus truly was? The choice is yours today. And just like you have a choice today, I am making the choice to end this class right here. Next time, Lord willing, I hope that we have one final class to wrap up this entire study. I will try and give us some practical advice first on how we can actually use John to talk to new converts and to make better Christians. I'll then shift gears and spend some time recapping everything that we have studied in hopes of leaving you with a lasting memory and a lasting summary that you can use in your everyday lives, kind of as a quick, ready reference. Again, I hope that you have enjoyed having breakfast on the beach with Jesus today, and I look forward to studying with you again soon. God bless.